This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. This is a very important program. It's an exclusive update on the Bilderberg Group meeting happening now. And I've been covering the activities of the Bilderberg Group for at least 3 decades, actually since 4 decades. The Bilderberg Group 2018. This is this group that the mainstream media essentially ignores, or they may talk about it in a couple of seconds. And that's conspicuous by its absence because when you have a consortium of one of the world's most powerful meetings and powerful groups in the entire world that meets on an annual basis, and the people who attend the Bilderberg Group are the very, very top tier of the globalist elite, the heads of the international banking families, the very heads and CEOs of the multinational media corporations, the heads of government, prime ministers, presidents, the heads of the military, the heads of the social media companies, the internet. This is the highest echelon of people, rulers, here on planet Earth. So to ignore the Bilderberg Group would be the cinematic television equivalent of not covering the Academy Awards, because whether you like the Academy Awards or not, it's jam-packed with superstars in the audience, and however many stars get awards at the Academy Awards, big red carpet event. So the Bilderberg Group, in its own field, which is vastly, vastly more powerful and influential than the Academy Awards, the fact that the media basically ignores it screams that it is conspicuous by its absence. So, we're going to give you an exclusive update on the Bilderberg Group. Now, let me say this for starters. I have been doing articles, writing books, speaking on the Bilderberg Group for 40 plus years. The vast majority of that time, I was called a conspiracy theorist for dealing with the subject. Probably among some circles, I would still be a conspiracy theorist for dealing with the reality, the objective reality of the Bilderberg Group. So before we get into this big meeting, and by the way, if we want to simplify the agenda of the Bilderberg Group, their 2018 agenda, it is an agenda for a one world government. That's always been the secret agenda for the Bilderberg Group. Its plan, its purpose is to destroy the independent nation state. It's to consolidate power top down from a very tiny ruling elite. And since 1954, when they first had their first meeting, they have been implementing and bringing together their plans for a one world government. The establishment of the European Union was a product of the Bilderberg Group. Some of the key players at the very first Bilderberg Group meeting were royalty in Europe, but many of them, in addition to being royalty in Europe, were active Nazis or high-ranking members of the Nazi Party. So there's a direct correlation between the Nazi money, the Nazi organizational structure, and the Nazi elite, and the establishment of the Bilderberg Group. Now, I'm not saying that the Bilderberg Group, per se, is a Nazi organization today, nor am I saying that it is some kind of extension of Nazism as predicted by Adolf Hitler. But what I am saying is that in its very beginnings, it had some conspicuous ties to the Nazis and Nazi Germany, and more importantly, Nazi money. So, the Bilderberg Group is currently meeting in Italy, of all places. Now, what's interesting is Italy is in the middle of this populist election, and the super billionaire who influences a great deal of American politics and politics throughout Europe and around the world, George Soros, he appears to have suffered a defeat in Italy, as Italy, like so many other European nations, like the United States, seems to be moving towards what they call a populist government. In other words, a government run by the people, or as we would say in America, we the people, versus governments that are run top down by the elite, the super elite. Did you ever ask yourself the question, whether it comes to the United States of America or whether it comes to the European Union or any other area of the world? Let's just look at the European Union for a moment. And many of you are listening to me in the European Union. And I want to ask you to make sure that you send the link to this program to your friends across the world, across the United States, and to your friends across the European Union. Because the European Union has a much heavier censorship than the United States, at least for the moment. Now, let's not delude ourselves. America is on the fast track to the same kind of censorship that the European Union has. They're just a number of years ahead of us. So it's important to send a link of this program, the Paul McGuire Report, to people that need to know the truth, that need to be informed, both here in the U.S., across the world, and the European Union. Their game plan is a one-world government. And at this meeting in Italy, where George Soros, who is George Soros? George Soros is not just some billionaire who accidentally stumbled onto the world stage. George Soros is kind of the front man for powerful international banking families and the globalists who truly rule our world. The idea that our world is run by anything else but an elite group of globalists is really kind of a fairy tale. And that's nothing new in human history. Throughout human history, the world has been ruled by an elite, whether it was the Pharaoh god kings or Mystery Babylon or the Greek and Roman emperors or the emperor of China or whatever. The world has always been ruled by some kind of secretive elite. Now, one individual who is a key player, and Rockefeller was a key player also. Several Rockefellers were key players. But the most recent high-level Rockefeller died at the age of 101 years old. He obviously was not going to some kind of universal health care place to get treated. He obviously had privileged and very elite-oriented health care that isn't available to you and I or the common purpose. But people like Henry Kissinger, who was Rockefeller's right-hand man. And Henry Kissinger, along with others, is one of the key leaders in this one-world government. And Henry Kissinger has written openly about his involvement in one-world government. So this week in Turin, Italy, the Italians, like many others in the European Union, are finally waking up. And they're passing bills to stop mass migration from militant extremist Islamic nations. Because you see, the globalist elite have a completely different agenda than the ordinary men and women of the various European nations, like Italy. In the same way, the globalist elite here in America have an entirely different agenda than the average working class or middle class American man or woman. In both cases, the globalist elite, no matter how they masquerade, and by the way, they're very good at masquerading. Notice how the United Nations, which was founded by Rockefeller, but the United Nations is essentially created by the globalist elite to create a fairy tale for the average dumbed down American and the average dumbed down European or Asian or whatever. It's a fairy tale to dumb people down. And the fairy tale is that something like this. And I'm not trying to knock the Disney organization, but you've gone to their theme parks and they have that ride where they sing, "It's a small world after all. It's a small, small world," something like that. And then you go through the ride. It promotes globalism, but it promotes globalism in a friendly, let's say, childlike perspective. But behind the scenes, it's still the beginning of an indoctrination into globalism, into the hearts and minds of young people. In the same way, when I was a kid growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, I forgot how old I was. I was young, I mean, really young. They had what was called the New York World's Fair. And I forgot how old I was, maybe 12, maybe 11, maybe younger. I don't remember the exact age. And if any of you have seen some of the Men in Black science fiction movies with Will Smith, you'll notice that in at least one of the movies, they're in this like theme park type thing, and there's a giant metallic statue or a giant metallic sphere of planet Earth, and it's very, very large. Now, what's interesting about that is that giant metallic sphere, which is the Earth, was I don't know if you call it a statue or whatever you call it, that was left over from the New York World's Fair that occurred in that exact spot decades and decades ago. And every World's Fair was like the equivalent of a Disneyland in and of itself. And I had the opportunity as a very young boy, after school or whatever, I would sneak into the World's Fair. I don't know how long it lasted, but I would sneak in practically every day by climbing over the fence in a deserted area with my friends. And we gave ourselves an all day or all night free pass to the World's Fair, which was mind-blowing with its technology and stuff. And it basically showed you this vision of the future where all of mankind would come together in a one-world government and everything would be utopian. Now, the purpose of the World's Fair was, again, to indoctrinate young people and adults in the idea of a one-world government. And it's always utopian, these one-world governments. It always presents itself as kind of a heaven on earth. But in reality, what the secret, and this is the challenge that you and I have before us in terms of educating people. This is not a matter of something to do with like a leftist perspective versus a right-wing perspective or a progressive perspective versus a conservative perspective. Really, really smart people that are educated and informed, whether they're on the left or the right, whether they're progressives or conservatives, they understand. The ones on the top, the smart people, they all understand that things like capitalism and communism or conservatism and liberalism are really a form of manipulation where the elite allows people to participate in a mass illusion, which fabricates this lie that there's really two opposite and opposing forces. So it could be like capitalism versus communism, progressivism versus conservatism, or whatever. But in reality, when you really look behind the scenes in world history and what's going on in the world today, you will discover with absolute certainty, assuming you do your homework, because the facts are indisputable, you will discover that it is the same people, the elite, it is the same people, the highest level elite, specifically the international banking families, the ruling elite, the globalists. It's the same people among the globalist elite, that would be the super capitalists, by the way, This elite, this ruling class, they were the same people that financed both sides of World War I. They were the same people that financed both sides of World War II. They were the same people who financed both communism and capitalism. And they were the same people that financed and orchestrated many of the global conflicts and wars around the world, including the Vietnam War, etc. They are the same people that financed the leftist grassroots organizations, and they're the same people that financed the right-wing conservative, even in some cases, certain aspects of the like very conservative movements in the United States. In other words, these secret hidden players, the puppet masters that control the masses with their puppet strings, that includes politicians, they are the same people that finance, bankroll, and organize both sides of a conflict. And it's important for you to understand that, because if you don't understand that, then you don't understand the primary theory. And it's not really a theory, it's a working organizational template by which the globalists in which the globalists are actively putting together their one world government. In other words, the globalists, whether you like it or not, have had the privilege of being highly educated, highly trained, and they mix with others of the same caliber, and they have access to being educated by people who are really brilliant, and they receive the highest level of education, unlike the scientifically dumbed down masses in the United States and Europe and so on and so forth. The highest echelons of the elite, they get an education that's real and that equips them to rule the world. So their basic philosophy, let's say, behind Bilderberg 2018 and the agenda for a one world government is this. They use the template of the philosopher Hegel and his Hegelian dialectic. And that sounds complicated, but it really isn't. The Hegelian dialectic is a mechanism, a social, economic, political mechanism for unifying the world into a one world government. And the way the game is played is that the secret globalist elite, they raise up, let's say, two opposing forces. And those two opposing forces are always called synthesis and antithesis, okay? And then we have, well, actually, to make it clearer, the Hegelian dialectic consists of, on one end of the spectrum, a thesis, okay? On the other end of the spectrum, it is the antithesis. The goal of the Hegelian dialectic is to take the two opposite sides and move them into what is called a synthesis. So, to make this understandable and simple, let's give you, a basic example of the Hegelian dialectic at work. The ruling globalist elite will finance and organize, let's say, communism or Marxism, which is an antithesis, all right? And then on the other side of the spectrum, the globalist ruling class elite will finance and organize what's called a thesis, which could be capitalism. So on one hand, or let's call it the left-hand side of the spectrum, you have communism or Marxism, which is antithesis. On the right-hand side of the spectrum, you have, let's say, capitalism or conservatism, which would be called thesis. Now, the same ruling elite, the same money, is financing both opposite sides. But the secret agenda is to use those polarizing opposite forces as a mechanism, psychologically, economically, politically, socially, to drive the masses of the world, not necessarily into antithesis, communism, not necessarily into thesis, which would be capitalism. The goal is to drive the masses into a middle area, which is neither left or right. It's in the middle, and it's called synthesis, where you theoretically take the best of both ends of the spectrum, where you theoretically take the best of communism and Marxism, and then you theoretically take the best of capitalism and conservatism, and you create a hybrid or a middle way or a third way, which is a synthesis, where you synthesize and bring together the best of capitalism and conservatism and the best of communism and Marxism. It sounds complicated, but it really isn't complicated. You cannot understand what the Bilderberg Group and its globalist agenda is all about for a one world government unless you first understand this foundational blueprint, this foundational operating principle upon which the secret globalist elite use to bring about massive global social transformation, economic transformation, societal transformation, psychological transformation, spiritual transformation of every kind. Their goal, again, is a globalist government. Now, we're just getting started here. I think that this information will be literally mind-blowing to you and enlightening and help you. And, wherever you happen to be on the political spectrum, if you're shut down and you're not open to facts, and I'm not asking you to accept anything that I'm stating at face value, but I am asking you, no matter how skeptical you are, if you will investigate the facts for yourself by comparing multiple sources, you will discover that this operating principle is not fictional, it's real. So we're going to help you discover that truth, but hopefully not in the sense of like a lecture, but hopefully in the sense of helping you to discover and understand the truth for yourself. Because Jesus Christ said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. It is imperative, absolutely imperative, that you send this program and other programs like this program. We're going to do a number of programs in the Bilderberg Group and their agenda for a global government. Send it out, spread the message far and wide to people that need to hear the truth all around the world. And you can do that by simply going to our website, which is paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Or just type in Paul McGuire on Google or something, and it'll take you to paulmcguire.us. And we have hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of free articles, videos. We have our Roku channel. We have books that will really delve into this. We have countless hours of free radio programming you can listen to for free, videos of conferences I've spoken at, and again, the Roku channel. Our specific channel is Paul McGuire Ministries. So visit paulmcguire.us and be sure to use the social media listed there to send this message out far and wide. We'll be back in just a second. You are listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. We're getting into Bilderberg 2018 and their master plan for a one world government or a global government. And by the way, these people are serious. It's not a game for them. And once you understand what they're up to, whether you're on the right side politically, by that I mean right wing or left wing or communist or progressive or conservative or Ian Rand or whatever, wherever you are on the political social spectrum, you need to know the truth because you're being manipulated. and the primary methodology of manipulation is what is called the Hegelian dialectic. We're going to explain that further, and how, by the way, the Hegelian dialectic is not simply some esoteric intellectual economic theory, social transformation theory, but it actually has its roots in advanced ancient occult sciences. And if you think, well, gee, this host has been smoking too much weed in his studio in California, you're wrong. No, I'm not smoking a whole lot of weed. If you do your homework, and in fact, I'll show you a very simple way that I can prove that. I think that you will find the answer helpful in your own understanding and explaining it to other people simply. This is the Paul McGuire Report. Visit paulmcguire.us and spread the word far and wide while you still can, because remember, underneath the game, there's also, and they're discussing this openly at Bilderberg 2018, one of their primary agendas is total Orwellian thought police censorship of all media, all internet, all social media, every form of communication. They want total lockdown. So for those of you that are, think it's great to have political correctness, remember this, that at the end of the day, no matter where you are on the political spectrum or social spectrum, if you're advocating political correctness, sooner or later, and it's usually sooner, your free speech, your right to speak out, you get your throat cut, so to speak. You won't be able to speak out because censorship or political correctness never ever ends by just censoring one group's opinion. It always, inevitably, 100% of the time, ends up censoring everybody's speech. And is that the world you want to live in? We'll be back in a second. This is Paul McGuire. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. You are listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Our topic is of vital significance to you. Why? Because no matter where you live on planet Earth, whether you live in the European Union, the USA, Canada, Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Middle East, wherever you live, the topic that we're talking about today is going to directly impact your life, your family's life, and your future. As such, you should spread this message far and wide. Why? Because this is an informational and educational process. You see, when people are in the dark, when they don't have the facts, the knowledge, and the truth, then they are easily exploited, subjugated, and turned into slaves. You know that. It's just common sense. And I don't want to insult anybody, because I operate from the premise that, for the most part, God does not create stupid people. Very rarely in my life, if really ever, I don't think I can recall meeting very many, if any, people that were actually stupid or dumb. And that was something I learned, decades and decades ago. I learned that most people are basically smart, but most people innately can figure things out. Now, not everybody, has the privilege of an education and can talk to you about economics or history and those kinds of things. But just on a human being to human being level, people are generally smart. They don't all have the same opportunities for education. So the average person, when you present to them the facts, they can figure things out. And that's what we're doing on this program. Okay, so the Bilderberg Group, established in 1954, with the help of some Nazi influence, etc., helped establish NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, directly helped create the European Union, And today, as every year since 1954, they have been meeting. This week they're meeting in Turin, Italy, but they meet everywhere. Their agenda, as usual, is their plan for a one world government. Now, we were talking about something very important. The fact that they use what's called the Hegelian dialectic to bring about their new world order or one world government. What does that mean? Well, we explained it to you, but let's add something to it. Now, first of all, if you don't believe what I'm saying, I have tons of free resources at paulmcguire.us, free articles, free radio archives, free television programming at our Roku Channel, and all kinds of free stuff for you to read where we get into this. If you want to really educate yourself and you really want to turn on the light bulb inside your brain and really expand your consciousness and your power and mind, then I encourage you to get a number of my books where they're written in a popular style. They're not written, for theologians and philosophers. They're written in a popular style. I happen to be a professor or a doctor of eschatology. You'll almost never see me or hear me use those words. I think this is the first time I've used the words that I can recall on the radio program. So I have certain academic credentials in terms of studying and teaching the Bible theologically. I'm also a licensed minister and other things. I don't usually talk about that because my goal is to reach everybody. And I don't want to write like a theologian or a scholar or an intellectual. I want to write for the common person. And I believe in order to do that, you can make truth very interesting and very fast-moving and very powerful. And the thing that I'm so grateful to God for is people continually say after they read one of my books, I picked it up and I couldn't put it down and I finished your book, Paul, in 2 or 3 days. I hear that all the time. And from people with practically no education to people with college educations, because I do it in a fast-moving style, because my goal is to educate the average person, and you can't do that if you're going to be boring and scholarly. So the books, I don't like to use the word fun, but they are fun in the sense that they're not like dry, dull. You know what I'm saying? So the first book I would recommend that you get, and we have a special deal on it because I want to get it out to you. It's called The Day the Dollar Died. Now, you might recognize the cover because everybody and his brother on the internet have tried to rip off the cover and the title. It happens with a lot of my books. But it's called The Day the Dollar Died. And the reason I'm bringing it up is it has a lot of things in it, such as the secret of the money system. The secret of the money system in the United States and the world, because they're one and the same. But what I point out and document for you, among other things, in The Day the Dollar Died, is this. These facts, which you absolutely need to understand and master in order for you to know what's going on and to have the power to control your own life and to not be a victim or a slave, but to have a life worth living. In The Day the Dollar Died, I name, for example, the Wall Street banking firms, the international banking families that live here in the United States and in Europe. I name them by name in The Day the Dollar Died. And I show you with charts and paragraphs how these very wealthy super elite, most of them were super capitalists, how they were responsible for financing the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which became the Communist Revolution in Russia, how it was Wall Street and a group of international banking families that financed one of the bloodiest revolutions in human history, which is the Marxist Communist Revolution in Russia, which took place, the official date is in 1917. And that was a planned operation by the international banking elite. Now, at the same time, other members of the international banking elite, they financed capitalist and in some cases fascist movements. So these international banking elite people and families, first of all, they make billions and trillions of dollars by selling weapons of mass destruction and military supplies and financing the armies of opposing sides in the war all the time. Number two is when we get into World War II, and I talk about this in The Day the Dollar Died, Adolf Hitler was financed by powerful Wall Street banking firms, banks, American banks, European banks, and international banking families. Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, and the whole thing were financed by Wall Street. And in the book, I also talk about the fact that there are certain very well-known political families in the United States, such as families that produce a number of prominent U.S. presidents, but their grandfather or great-grandfather operated as Hitler's banker and owned and worked with other Wall Street firms in bankrolling Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. Yeah, and these are household names, people that you may have voted for. And then other parts of these international banking families and Wall Street, they would finance the communist side of World War II, or the allies like Great Britain and the United States. So you have these same international, basically super capitalist banking firms financing both Adolf Hitler and Germany and Great Britain. And they do it over and over again. It's scandalous. But you need to know who these banks are. You need to know who these individuals are because it's all part of a master game plan, which I explained in The Day the Dollar Died. And the master game plan, you have to understand, involves the Hegelian dialectic, but it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. And so in addition to understanding the financial level, the banking level, which I did in The Day the Dollar Died, you have to also understand where these international elite globalist families are getting some of their knowledge and power from. And I have done 40 years of research, and I've documented that these international banking families, these super globalists, many times, not in every single case, but many times, are high-ranking members of the Illuminati. Some of them are Satanists or Luciferians. They belong to a variety of secret societies, all that the media ignores, societies like Bohemian Grove and Skull and Bones and so on and so forth, the Illuminati and many other societies, which I explain. And they're actually getting their information from occult and demonic forces. Now, before you say, I don't believe it, you don't have the right to say you don't believe it unless you've done some reading and homework. So I suggest that you get a copy of my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. That book is fast-moving. I mean, it's powerful, and it just rides the tracks like lightning. And it will explain to you the origination of these ancient occult secret societies by which the occult globalist elite, many who are Luciferians and Satanists and members of the Illuminati, gain supernatural knowledge and wisdom. And one of the things that they were able to gain, and Troy Anderson and I, who wrote together the Babylon Code, and our latest book, which is the #1 selling prophecy book in all the world, it's called Trumpocalypse. And Trumpocalypse is not only the #1 selling prophecy book in the entire world, it's #1 in about 8 other categories also. And it's been read by the highest level people in the White House, the President of the United States, the Vice President, Dr. Ben Carson, many other major politicians and leaders, and both of these books, including A Prophecy of the Future of America, explain to you the secret occult connection between what is called the deep state and ancient secret occult societies. So to make it simple, and I explain it in great detail in like A Prophecy of the Future of America, you take your dollar bill, and on the back of your dollar bill, many of you heard me talk about this, it's really simple. You see a pyramid on the back of the US dollar. What does the pyramid stand for? It's an ancient, universally recognized occult symbol. The pyramid stands for the hierarchical structure of the New World Order. There is the all-seeing eye in the pyramid. That is actually the all-seeing eye of Horus, or the all-seeing eye of Lucifer. Therefore, the pyramid is Luciferian. It's a Freemasonic symbol. At the base of the pyramid, there are the words in Latin, Novus Order Seclorum, which simply means New Order of the Ages or New World Order. So on the back of the US dollar bill, and I just happen to have one here in the studio, thank goodness, at least I have one, I'm looking at, there are countless occult symbols all over this dollar. And I see the pyramid, I see Novus Order Seclorum, which means New World Order. I see the pyramid, and I see the all-seeing eye of Lucifer on the top. And what this is signaling to the elite and to the initiated is that the currency, the U.S. currency and the currencies of the world are actually, the money system is actually a secret occultic control system that was developed at Mystery Babylon. And it's based on an ancient Luciferian occult system in which you create money for the express purpose of loaning money to the masses of poor people and to governments around the world. And the reason you loan the masses and governments around the world money is because then, when they borrow money from you, they become your slaves. This is an occult principle that Lucifer taught his disciples at Mystery Babylon. Okay? It is imperative that you understand that, because you know what? If you don't understand that, you don't understand anything. I've had the privilege of talking to financial planners, very high-level, respected financial experts. Many of them are very brilliant in their fields. They're very knowledgeable in their fields. But a large percentage of them don't understand the primary occultic nature of currency. And without that understanding, they really, really can't do their job properly. Let me give you an example. But before I do, I want to get back to the occult symbolism on the back of the US dollar. And the occult symbolism is on the currency of other nations. It's on the IMF, International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, who we talk about in great detail in our book, Trumpocalypse and the Babylon Code, and in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America. She's the head of the IMF. She gave several televised lectures, and I believe she'll be attending at the Bilderberg 2018 meeting. She gave several popular lectures, one at the Council of Foreign Relations and the other at the National Press Club, where she spent about 45 minutes of her hour talks each talking about occult symbolism, occult numerology, and the global occult system of economics. And then she talked about the coming global economic reset or coming global economic reboot. Now, you're not going to understand what the coming global economic reboot is really all about unless you have some clue as to the occultic nature and foundation of the entire world's monetary system. Remember, Jesus Christ said you can't worship God and mammon at the same time. What did he mean by mammon? Mammon is like a Well, God is our source. That's what the Bible teaches. Everything you need, food, whatever, survival, whatever you need, the Bible teaches you that it is God that is your source ultimately. And then the occultic Luciferian systems, especially beginning with Mystery Babylon, which happened at the Tower of Babel when Nimrod was the ruler. And remember, the Tower of Babel was an interdimensional stargate, very similar to CERN. It used occult ancient technology. It was also the word Babylon, or Babel, as I explain in Prophecy of the Future of America, means gate of the gods. It was and the gods were demonic gods, demons. It was an interdimensional portal or stargate. Now, in ancient Mystery Babylon, they began printing various forms of money on papyrus. They used certain coins, pieces of paper, etc. And the essential economic occultic principle behind banking is this. You loan to governments, you loan to the masses money, which is based on a magical system or a system of sorcery. In that, you are loaning governments and the masses money, but your money is not really backed up by anything tangible or anything of value like gold or silver or land or precious metals or whatever. You're loaning the masses and governments some kind of representation of value like paper money or papyrus or whatever, but there's nothing behind it but your belief that it has value. That's why it's a magical system. There's really nothing to back it up besides belief. And in this way, the globalist elite can control the world. It doesn't actually cost them anything because they've created an illusory economic system in which the dollars and all the other economic instruments around the world are essentially worthless. There's nothing of tangible value to back them up. And yet these international bankers control the monetary systems of most nations, and they loan to both governments and people trillions of dollars. They have nothing to back it up, but these hundreds of millions of people and governments have to pay back what the international bankers or the elite loan them. They have to pay it back with interest, substantial interest. So this endlessly enriches the international bankers. But remember, at its essence, it's occultic, it's magical. By that I mean it's based on sorcery or an illusion, because it costs nothing really for the bankers to print the paper or to use the papyrus or use cheap metal in the form of coins. You see, it's like, to make it very simple, let's say you and I or anybody you knew had and they're not that expensive, but let's say you had one of the highest quality color Xerox type machines there is. And assuming there weren't any secret barcodes in it or whatever, like there really wasn't a number of years ago. Well, you could sit in the back room somewhere and you could print yourself $1 million with just a bunch of cartridges of different colored ink, an original of $1 of a particular denomination, let's say $100. And over a period of time, you could launder $1 million of money that you created with a Xerox machine. Nothing to back it up. Except maybe the $100 you used as the original model. Well, that's essentially how the global economic system works. Now, if you have difficulty understanding that, then I suggest you get a copy of The Day the Dollar Died, A Prophecy of the Future of America, and books like that, which explain it in detail. Bilderberg, the Bilderberg group, and these people, they're fully aware of this. This is how they manipulate the world system. This is why the Bible talks about what is known as the world system, or the one world economic system. And remember that it was in Mystery Babylon, at the Tower of Babel, that the world's first one world government was created. And God came down in Genesis 11 and he judged it and destroyed it. Thus, God was judging globalism, and he divided the one world government into independent, separate nations as a check and balance, which tells us that God uses nationalism as a safety measure to keep sinful mankind accountable. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. I need you to help me spread this message far and wide as fast as possible to as many people as possible, while the doors of freedom of information are still open around the world. Because while these doors are open, we can use this kind of teaching to bring in a last day's soul harvest, to win souls for Jesus Christ, to make disciples of all nations. By the way, making disciples of all nations involves teaching them the truth about the economic system, especially when God unmasks the economic system in Genesis 11 and Revelation 17 and 18. So making disciples of all nations means teaching and communicating biblical and prophetic truth all around the world for the purpose of saving souls and occupying the land until he comes. In order to do that, I need your help. I need many of you to respond to the call of God, because I believe that God is calling you. He's calling you to be a prayer warrior and an intercessory for me, my family, and this ministry. That is a solemn responsibility. And when God calls you to do anything, your responsibility is, if you're truly serving Jesus as your Lord, is to obey the Lord and to do what he assigns you to do. We all have multiple assignments. And I know God is calling many of you to be prayer warriors on an ongoing basis. And I want to thank all of you who have already accepted that assignment, and just let you know how much I appreciate your fasting and prayers for our ministry. Also, many of you have talents and abilities in spreading information. I want to thank you for answering God's call to spread our message far and wide, and use your giftings and talents in his service by doing that. Thank you for doing that. Others of you have yet to obey the call of God, but I'm confident that as you walk with the Lord, as you seek the Lord, his voice will become clearer and more audible to you. And then finally, it obviously takes money to run a ministry and communication. And so I thank God for each and every one of you that have not been content to play church or just go on spiritual autopilot. But I thank God for each and every one of you who have truly asked God, asked Jesus, Lord, what should I do? How can I help Paul McGuire in this ministry? And then you've been faithful to obey the Lord. No matter what he tells you, you've been faithful to make your financial contributions and donations so that we can finance this outreach. And because of partners like you, we're able to reach countless millions of people around the world and bring in a real harvest of souls and a real harvest of people who have walked away from the Lord, but they've tuned in because they were intrigued by some message like Bilderberg 2018, and they came back to the Lord. So through your partnership, all of this is possible. I encourage you to go to paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us. Take advantage of all our free resources. Make sure you send out all the free stuff that can be distributed from paulmcguire.us. And as God leads you, drop us a note and let us know that you're praying for us, or you can make a donation online, or you can do it through the mail, whatever is easier for you. But remember, when you read the goals of some of these globalist groups, and we're going to get into it in a moment, they intend to shut down free speech. In fact, at the Bilderberg Group 2018 meeting, they have all kinds of information that they're discussing about getting rid of privacy, controlling the internet and social media and data even more. They want to censor all information, all truth, and they want to end your God-given right to privacy. And it is a God-given right. And you need to stand up for that right, because if you don't, you're going to wake up one day and a person without privacy, a person who doesn't have freedom of speech, is a person who's really a slave. And living the life of a slave is really not worth living. So I encourage you to go to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report, and we will be... This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Bilderberg 2018. What is Bilderberg Group? It is one of a number of super powerful, highly influential groups that secretly control and rule our world. But in addition to that, they are bringing our world into a one world government. It's important to also understand that the one world government, or the New World Order, that is being planned by Bilderberg and other secret societies or semi-secret societies and groups, this is not just a secular atheistic idea. This is something, and if you read my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America and Mass Awakening, and especially the book on mind control, which is Conquering the Matrix, this is something that they've been programming the masses from childhood to believe and accept in for countless decades. This goal and plan for a new world order or a global government was actually warned of by God way back in Genesis 11. Most Christians have no idea what Genesis 11, they don't even read it. But Genesis 11 is really an account of the world's first global government, global economic system, and global religion that occurred at the Tower of Babel in ancient Babylon. And God came down and specifically judged this global governmental, religious, and economic system because he saw that in the hearts of the men and women, they wanted to be like gods. They wanted to worship Lucifer. And so God came down and judged this first global system known as Mystery Babylon in Genesis 11. And he separated all the peoples into different independent nation states. And he confused their language, so they all spoke different languages as they inhabited their different nation states. Thus, it is very clear when you read Genesis 11, for those of you who have friends that are confused, the Bible very clearly never promotes global government. Never promotes global government. The Bible is against global government. Why? Because the Bible recognizes that man is sinful and in rebellion from God. Therefore, the global government is always the idea of Lucifer. When mankind unites in its sinfulness, whatever mankind builds out of its pseudo-unity, like a global government, a global religion, and a global economic system, it is always for the purpose of Luciferian evil. This is what God was warning about in Genesis 11. This is why God is for nationalism, and this is why God judged the whole globalist New World Order thing way back at the Tower of Babel. But God also goes into detail over and over again throughout the book of Genesis, through many of the prophets, through the entire Old Testament, and throughout the entire New Testament. God warns over and over again that in the last days, mankind will once again attempt to rebuild Mystery Babylon that God judged in Genesis 11. And so we read in books like Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, again, books that most churches censor from the people. Can you imagine being a pastor and censoring God's word? In Revelation 13, we read about how this one world government is headed up by the head of a one world government. He's the Antichrist. And then he's called the first beast. And then there's the second beast, who is the false prophet. And the false prophet is the supernaturally enabled individual who is in charge of the one world economic system and the one world religion. So that the time is coming very quickly, perhaps in our lifetime, sooner than you think, where you will not be able to buy or sell or participate in the global economic system unless you receive what is called the mark of the beast, described in Revelation 13. And the mark of the beast is some kind of microchip or nanochip or DNA modification implant that will be located under your forehead or your right hand. And it most likely will go with some kind of RFID wireless signal. It'll contain a memory storage unit, many control factors, and it will be the new currency. You see, the game plan already on the table is to make the currencies of the world be cashless because they want to monitor everything. That could at first be in the form of like a credit card, but then the next step is that they're going to insert a microchip implant smaller than the size of a grain of rice in your right hand or your forehead. It could even be smaller than that. And by using that implant, only then will you be able to buy and sell and participate in the global economic system and the global religion. But just like the currency we use today, which is filled with occultic symbols, you will not be allowed to receive or get the mark of the beast, the implant, unless you openly profess to worship the Antichrist as God. You have to publicly confess that you're going to worship the Antichrist as God. In addition to that, you're going to have to renounce any belief that Jesus Christ is your Lord, or Jesus Christ is God, or Jesus Christ is your personal Savior. So in order to get the mark of the beast, you're going to have to worship the Antichrist as God, and then you're going to have to reject Jesus Christ as Lord. Now, that's a very serious thing. And this is what is predicted. This is what is going to happen in the mystery Babylon that emerges in the last days. So, anyone who wants the mark of the beast is going to have to renounce Christ and worship the Antichrist. The problem with that is that at the end of the age, when Christ returns, all those who chose to accept the mark of the beast will be sentenced for all eternity in a cosmic prison called the lake of fire or hell. And you will have no opportunity. If you take the mark of the beast, you will have no opportunity ever of getting into heaven. Now, for Christians who have to endure the persecution and reject the Antichrist as their God, and who refuse to deny Jesus Christ as Lord, they tragically, according to Scripture, are going to be beheaded. However, this, as painful and horrific as it sounds, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. This will happen in such a nanosecond manner that I don't even know if people will experience pain. If they do experience pain, it'll be over before it began, and they will be in heaven with Jesus in their brand new glorified bodies, and they will live eternally in heaven with Jesus Christ. In addition to that, God has a plan to rescue his people and deliver his people from the wrath to come. But all of these are predicted. These things are prophesied by the Bible. The New World Order, which is nothing more than a counterfeit of the kingdom of heaven, is prophesied throughout the Bible. And then in Revelation 17 and 18, we see the return of Babylon the Great, Mystery Babylon, also known as the Great Harlot or the Great Whore, of which all the kings and the globalist elite, it says, fornicated with her to get their power. And the devil infuses the power of the harlot, Mystery Babylon, or Babylon the Great, and that will be the Luciferian Antichrist system that exists and rules and reigns on planet Earth for at least 7 years until Christ returns at the second coming, when he will come down from heaven along with the armies of heaven to destroy the forces of the Antichrist, all those who follow the Antichrist, and to judge every nation that attempts to wage war against Jesus Christ at his second coming. And the physical location of this final conflict will be called Armageddon, or the War of Armageddon, in which, at the War of Armageddon, Jesus Christ, along with his angelic armies, along with the armies of heaven, will once and for all defeat Satan, Lucifer, the Antichrist, the false prophet, the nations in rebellion against him, and all those who have accepted the mark of the beast. He will defeat them once and for all at Armageddon. He will then rule and reign from planet Earth, from Jerusalem, which will be the new capital of planet Earth. And that will be a 1,000-year millennial reign of Jesus Christ on earth. And then, in this process, God is going to burn up the old earth, the old heaven. It will be burned up because it's corrupted and defiled. And God will bring into being a new earth, a new heaven, and a new Jerusalem, known as heaven or paradise, perfect, undefiled. And every person who accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior by faith and asked Jesus to forgive them of their sins will live forever and ever in heaven with God for all eternity. And all the pain and suffering that people experience won't even be a memory. The New World Order and those that planned it will be totally in non-existence. And tragically, many of the architects of the New World Order will spend forever in the lake of fire, which is this cosmic prison, because in their hearts they are in rebellion from the true God, because man is not God. So, God does have the victory. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And we'll be back in just a second. Once again, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. Bilderberg 2018. The big globalists are meeting there annually, as they've done every year since 1954. Henry Kissinger, one of the architects of this New World Order, and all these globalists. And who are these globalists? Well, you just read the who's who on the list of people who attend the Bilderberg meetings, and it'll tell you, in many respects, who the heads of this globalist one world system really are. Now, one thing that's very interesting to notice is the globalists they're not the friends of the common people. They just pretend to be the friends of the common people. They hire rock stars, pop stars, they hire musicians and people like that, young people, to sell the idea of a United Nations type paradise as a good thing. That's a total lie. The United Nations has not been created for the benefit of the common man. The United Nations is nothing more than a ruling instrument for the globalist elite. It's a con job. But we have so many people in America, scientifically dumbed down, programmed, in Europe also, to be kind of dumb. They're dumbed down. If you don't believe it, read the research I put together in my book, Conquering the Matrix, and you will see that for hundreds of years, the masses have been scientifically dumbed down using social engineering, propaganda, persuasion, certain educational modalities, scientific mind control, repetition, the latest development in neurological sciences and other things. So the average person who's dumbed down, by the way, has no clue that they're dumbed down. The Bilderberg 2018, what's on their agenda? Well, they're very concerned about Donald Trump because they consider Donald Trump the greatest threat to their New World Order. And because of Donald Trump, according to the Bilderberg Group and other globalist organizations, they believe that Trump and his nationalism and the success of Trump's nationalism is causing it to spread all over the world. So you see the elections in Italy and other European nations. The people, the masses are rejecting the globalist prime ministers and leaders, the puppets that were put in place to do the bidding of the globalist elite. I'm not going to name names, but people like the head of Germany and many other European nations that are deliberately carrying out policies that are destroying these independent sovereign nations. Why do they do that? Because they're not really serving the people. They're serving their globalist masters who put them into power. Another thing is that the Bilderberg Group is concerned about is the U.S., the election, and what's going to happen in the United States before the midterm election. Remember, it's not Russia that has been meddling in the affairs of elections all across the world. It's the globalist elite. Remember, it's the globalist elite that own, again, I need to spell this out for a lot of you because it's new information. When I first began writing books, there were 200 separate companies or corporations, 200 of them, that controlled all the media in the United States of America. This was about 30 years ago, okay? 200 separate corporations. That meant there was some diversity, some difference of opinion, okay? Today, by comparison, there are only 3 corporations that control all of the mainstream media in the United States. And these 3 corporations are multinational, globalist corporations. That's why they all say the same thing. That's why all the late-night comedians on cue attack Trump every single night. They attack him, despite the fact that they're incredibly boring, despite the fact that they're alienating their audience on cue, like dogs that have been trained to bark by giving them a cracker. They attack Trump, and there's a uniformity. There's a oneness in the delivery and the communication of news. And the reason there is because you only got 3 globalist corporations owned by the globalists controlling all of the mainstream media. That's not freedom of the press, by the way. That's George Orwell's thought police. Now, the Bilderberg Group wants to continue and accelerate their attacks against what they call fake news. And what is fake news? Fake news is any news information, even if it's totally true, any news that disagrees with the agenda of the international globalists is labeled fake news and attacked. Fake news has nothing to do with whether or not it's true or not true. Anything that disagrees with the globalist agenda is labeled fake news, and they use that as a pretense to wage war against the truth, because they're not for the truth. They're for power and control. And to be blunt, they want to make the masses of mankind their slaves. So, if you go back to the year 2010, and this is an interesting fact, the former NATO Secretary General made a public announcement in which he released some very, very disturbing information. Not that it was totally secret, but it just wasn't said publicly before. This former NATO Secretary General publicly admitted that the people that go to the Bilderberg meetings, the elite, were mandated to implement and make decisions for the sole purpose that when they gathered together with their conferences of the world's elite, it didn't matter whether their decisions violated the laws of the various independent countries. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's a law in the United States and in many nations that if our politicians, and our politicians from presidents to who knows what else, they flock to these Bilderberg group meetings like Bilderberg 2018. And there's a law in the United States, as in other nations, that if our politicians, if high-level people in the United States, especially politicians, attend a meeting like Bilderberg 2018, and if they are influenced by what is called foreign agents in secret, that means just sitting there and absorbing the marching orders of the Bilderberg group, or meeting in hotel suites and discussing their secret plans for world domination and a one world economic system, that technically, if our politicians participate in any of that, which they do, they are violating this law, and they are deliberately putting themselves in a position to be influenced by foreign agents, which is against the Constitution. But by the way, nobody enforces it. So you have politicians in the U.S. and across the world that have totally violated their oath of office, and they are carrying out policies and agendas and economic things that ultimately will destroy the United States as we know it. And no one, especially the media, because they're controlled, blows the whistle. In 2009, a high-level Bilderberg person openly spoke about their plan for a single currency called the euro that was to be implemented before it happened. So you see, think about how outrageous it is. Prior to that, all the European nations in the European Union had their own individual nation-state currencies, okay? And everybody was happy. But they all had their own currencies. It was kept secret from all the average Europeans because the media in Europe is controlled also. It was kept secret from the masses that the elite had planned to do away with and destroy all the independent national currencies and replace the independent national currencies with a new currency called the euro. I mean, that's outrageous. That's what they want to do on a global level. They want to destroy all independent national currencies and give us a one world currency. And that was the plan, by the way, of the Bilderberg Group. Now, let's mention a couple of other things here that are vitally important. First of all, the Bilderberg Group. Remember, the average American, the average European, the average person in Asia, Africa, South America, all across the world, for the most part, there are exceptions, but the average individual has been programmed through scientific mind control. They've been dumbed down through things like persuasion, advertising, propaganda, social engineering, educational modalities, educational psychology, etc. They've been deliberately dumbed down so they can no longer think on a higher level like previous generations used to think. That's why they can be so incredibly stupid when they're interviewed spontaneously on the street. Okay, so these people like the Bilderberg Group openly talk about what they're going to do in certain outlets in the press, knowing that the average person will have a glazed look over their eyes and it won't even register. But remember, when you go back to the year 2014, the Bilderberg Group began to hyper-focus on all kinds of brand new computerized mass surveillance and spying technology. They were talking about mandating microchip implants. You had the heads of the big social media giants, the big search engines, the big internet companies flocking all over Bilderberg. And the Bilderberg Group openly talked about increasing mass surveillance and compiling metadata on every single person, which was denied. And at the Bilderberg Group, even though it's completely diametrically opposed to the Constitution of the United States, they were talking about using these advanced computerized technology to end your right to privacy, which is against the Constitution, because you have, according to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the right from unreasonable search and seizure. That's a constitutional right, which means nobody has the right to search through your computer records, etc., or your cell phone or whatever. But it's being done daily. Then they openly talked about this concept, which your average American has no idea about. They called this new concept the Internet of Things. And the whole idea was, and I believe the person who made that quote public was a former head of the CIA. And the Internet of Things simply means that any electronic device, things that you would never in your wildest imagination consider to be electronic spying devices or surveillance devices, like your refrigerator, like your microwave, like your dishwasher, like your washing machine, like the smart meter outside of your house, and on, not to mention your digital TV, not to mention your laptop, not to mention your cell phone, and all these new electronic devices that you talk to in your house and stuff. All of this was called the Internet of Things, and every one of those devices that I just mentioned to you can have, and often do have, the capacity to spy on you visually and through audio. You're just unaware of it. They openly talked about it, but they're counting on the stupidity of the American people and the people around the world. So they openly, even though it was against the Constitution, I believe it was former President Bill Clinton who openly said these, what I consider to be blasphemous words. He said something to the effect of, the average American has no reasonable expectation of privacy, or no reasonable right to privacy. Can you believe that he said that? The average American has no reasonable right to privacy or reasonable expectation of privacy. You see, to dumb down people, that sounds just fine. But to people that are educated, they should know that the Constitution of the United States of America and the Bill of Rights says very clearly that we are to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. That's in our Founding Fathers' documents. Now, they didn't have computers back then. Back then they were talking about sending troops through your houses and searching through your personal papers and effects. But it is just as applicable to the Internet of Things and electronic mass surveillance. The Bill of Rights says very clearly that it is the right of the average American, as a citizen of America, to have the right to privacy, to be protected from unreasonable search of seizure. You have absolutely every right to expect privacy. So what Bill Clinton said, and many others said, and you hear people in high-level offices say this all the time, it's 180 degrees opposite of what our founding fathers, what our Constitution and Bill of Rights say. But you see, the average school kid, the average adult, has no idea what's in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, even though it is the ultimate law of our land, because they've been dumbed down so that they can be controlled. Now, at the Bilderberg meeting in 2014, it held a secret meeting where it planned to expand mass surveillance technology. And let me tell you something. I talk about many of the latest developments in mass surveillance technology in my book, Conquering the Matrix. And I can tell you right now that 99% of the people listening, you have no idea about what technologies actually exist now. You have no idea about the capacity of things like scalar technology, EMF waves, multidimensional technology, and highly sophisticated technological scientific developments in the control of thoughts, the creation of virtual reality, all kinds of things that you probably think are science fiction, but they're not science fiction. Read Conquering the Matrix. You can get it at paulmcguire.us. It's not science fiction. They're operational now. And in case you don't believe me, which is fine, but you owe it to yourself to check out the facts, I quote extensively from Edward Snowden because he has blown the whistle that these technologies, not only do they exist, they've existed for decades. So, in 2013, Snowden and others, WikiLeaks and other groups and whistleblowers warned the entire world that there were all these agencies spying on the population. Whether you were guilty or not, you're being spied on, like out of Minority Report with Tom Cruise. And then Snowden predicted that by the year 2025, devices, technology, household appliances, and any electrical device will send more data, more information, more surveillance about you, your family, and your activities than your internet, than your social media, than your Facebook account, than your laptop is doing now. So, to put it bluntly, your washing machine will begin communicating more about you and your private life to certain agencies than your internet, than your social media ever did. And that's by 2050. I don't even believe it's going to take that long. I believe it's already on the way. So, then another secret goal of the Bilderberg Group is to pack people into highly, densely populated, what they call smart cities, where their lives, that the average person's life, you see, the suburbs, the country will basically disappear. People will be jam-packed in what they call smart cities. And as they live in these smart cities, their lives are going to be controlled in all kinds of ways using the excuse of protecting the environment through all kinds of electronic means. So what this means is that you are being ruled by a globalist elite that consists of international banking, finance, business, politics, foreign policy, intelligence agencies, military-industrial complexes, the computer industrial complex, the big search engine and software companies that control not only electronic data, they are going to control your reality. Now, this note I want to drive home to you. Because the average American has been dumbed down and programmed, they do not realize that You are being brainwashed even now. I could name the movies. I don't have time. I could name the books. There are literally hundreds of feature films, television shows, books, movies, educational curriculums that are all brainwashing the dumbed down public all across the world that we're, in this apocalyptic environmental crisis. The only way we can save the world is for all of us to volunteer to live in vastly lower standards of living. That's why you see all these television shows that show how creatively you can decorate like these mini apartments or trailers or tiny homes or tiny apartments. I'm not making fun of people who live in tiny apartments or trailers or anything else. That's not my point. This is about the mass conditioning of the masses to make it cool, to make it a positive thing for people to live in tiny spaces. The days of large homes that our ancestors and our forefathers used to live in are going to be a thing of the past. They're conditioning you to think it's great to live in these little mini apartments that can be, redone. And then they want to jam you into cities. They'll use environmentalism. And only the elite and privileged, which will be a very tiny percentage of the population, will be allowed to live outside the cities. And you will be jammed into these cities in tiny apartments, tiny homes. They're selling you on that all already. They're conditioning you to want that, how cool it is. But the reality is, and this shows you the scientific power of dumbing people down. Do you think for 1 minute that any members of the globalist elite, the elite, the financial elite, the truly powerful people in our society, do you think for a moment, if you have any sanity left in your mind, that any of those people are going to live in tiny micro apartments or little micro houses, jam-packed in little cities? Do you think the elite and the ruling class are going to live in that kind of environment? The answer, unless your brains are completely fried, is absolutely not. No, they're not going to. Nor in the same way they don't do it now. Okay? It is you, the working class and the middle class. You're going to be jammed into these inner cities, okay, in very tiny, very small square footage places to live, electronically controlled. But the wealthier, the elite, I'm not talking about middle class or upper class, I'm talking above that. They will be allowed to have larger homes. They will be allowed to have vast farms. They'll be allowed to own countless thousands of acres. They will be allowed to live in all the government-owned forest areas. They will live like royal kings and queens in palaces with endless acres, stables, horses, private farms, that the masses will never be allowed to even see the lifestyle of the elite. It's happening now already. Look at the superstars in Hollywood. They're all screaming for all these environmental regulations. They all want everybody to live in jam-packed houses. But the Hollywood elite, they own these, not one, many of them own 5 or 6 palaces, magnificent mansions with endless acres of forest and trees. Somehow they managed to have these estates built in forests where supposedly no public land is available. And then when you get to the really high-level members of the elite, and I'm not going to drop names now for various reasons, but I can name you the names of big-time Hollywood feature film directors, other big-time people in politics, other movers and shakers, and I can tell you right now, they currently own multiple kingdoms and palaces all over the world. Many of them own massive, massive, totally independent farms in places like New Zealand and Australia and other out-of-the-way places where they have hundreds of employees, private armies, and they're self-sufficient. If there was an EMP attack, the amount of acreage they own, it's like they own their own forests and their own kingdoms. And you don't even know about it because they don't talk about it publicly. See, that's the thing. They have you sucker punched into thinking we're all going to be just sharing the brown rice together. No, we're not. I could name you names and show you pictures of, you would not believe the wealth and the kingdoms that the elite own. Their own islands, many of them. I'm not going to name names for deliberate reasons. They own hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of acres of land in foreign nations, which they basically own entire nations. And then they have these estates. They have their own private armies, heavily armed to protect themselves. They have their own organic food supplies. You think they eat the junk you're eating? I want to end this by saying this. We're going to continue on the Bilderberg 2018 tomorrow. You need to spread this far and wide. Look, let me tell you something. If you think that the health care that the elite, the globalist elite has, is the same health care that you have, then yeah, they have been successful in dumbing your brain down. If you think that the elite are eating what you're eating, yeah, you're dumbed down. The elite aren't eating the garbage, genetically modified organism foods. They have special crops, special animals that are bred, that are purely organic, that they eat. They don't live in areas where chemtrails are smogging up the atmosphere. They are living exclusive, privileged lives. You see, you got to understand something. Many of you are in a hypnotic illusion. This is what I talk about in my book, Conquering the Matrix. You're living in a hypnotic illusion. You think that what you see on television and what you read about in the magazines, etc., is reality. No, you don't get it. You are a puppet. Many of the politicians you think are leaders are puppets. They're all on puppet strings. But you haven't yet learned how to see the fact that there are puppet masters that are very powerful behind the scenes that pull the strings. And because you can't see them, and you can't see the lavish lifestyles upon which they live, you think that somehow we're going to all kumbaya together. You know, Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt, whatever his name is, Bono from U2. And we're going to sing Kumbaya by the United Nations. And, you know, there'll be social justice and there'll be, acceptance and tolerance for everybody. And we'll all share the wealth. Man, the last time I heard garbage talk like that, the last time I heard foolishness like that, was when I was 18, 19 years old, smoking dope as a young hippie in New York City, hanging out with so-called revolutionaries like Abbie Hoffman, who were preaching the same garbage. Man, you need to put down your joint and start reading a Bible, because the truth will set you free. You know why the elite are behind the legalization of pot? Because you think the elite want you to, they're interested in you being euphoric? Is that what you think it is? No. The elite happen to know that pot dumbs you down. It makes you complacent. It makes you lose the cutting edge of your mind. In other words, smoking lots of dope makes you stupid. You want me to name the movie stars and the music stars who are the biggest potheads? You want me to show you clips of them on TV? It's evident who they are. They look brainless. They have a stupid look in their eyes. So go ahead, light up a joint and walk around in your virtual reality. And you're going to wake up one day in a future that's a nightmare. But that's not the case for God's people. Those people who renew their minds with the Word of God and know the truth, which sets them free, those people who are not sheep, but actually read the Bible for themselves and don't allow their false shepherds to lead them astray from God's prophetic word. They know what's happening. Those people who actually read the words of Jesus and obey Jesus and invite Jesus into their life to make them born again and are saved, they know that where they're going. They have the Holy Spirit inside them, the Spirit of truth. They know they're not brainwashed. They know the Holy Spirit lives inside them. And they have the truth that has set them free. You can join them. You can be free, both in this lifetime and the lifetime to come for all eternity. But it means you're going to have to throw away all your little toys that keep you dumbed down. You're going to have to turn to Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. I want to encourage you to do that. And if you do, then write me and let me know that you've turned your life over to Jesus. How do you do that? That's really simple. I'm going to pray a prayer now. And if you want Christ to come into your life and make you born again, He'll do that. It's not complicated. If you repeat this prayer in your own words or just repeat it after me, and if you really mean it, Jesus will save you. So pray these words with me right now. I did many, many years ago, and it changed the direction of my life forever. Say these words if you mean it. Jesus Christ, I come to you now. I ask you, Jesus, to forgive me of all my sins. And Jesus, I ask you to come into my life right now. And Jesus, I ask you to make me born again, Lord. Lord, I thank you that you have answered my prayer, that you've come into my life, and that I'm born again. I thank you for saving my soul. In Jesus' name, amen. If you said that prayer and meant it, you may feel something, you may feel nothing. When I said that prayer, I felt nothing. But the next day, I had an overwhelming experience with Jesus Christ, and it changed my life forever. So, if you said that prayer and meant it, you are born again. The feelings will come, maybe immediately, maybe later, but you will encounter Jesus, and it will be a solid reality for you. And then you'll know what I'm talking about and what others are talking about when we say, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. And join us, partner with us as we spread the gospel in what the Bible calls the last days all across the earth. Partner with us through prayers. Partner with us every way you can. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Order your pre-release copy of The Greatest Battle and save yourself some money and help us take the land. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.